Hello everyone, this is Connor from Brisbane FTV Facilities, and this week on Film It Friday we're going to be covering time lapses because you've probably got a lot of time on your hands, so I'm going to show you a few different variations and how you can achieve certain looks. A lot of you probably shoot your time lapse by doing 25 frames a second, 1/50 shutter, and that's not the greatest way to do it. It does have its place, but it doesn't yield the greatest looking time lapse, and it can look fairly jittery in your timeline. So the first example I've done is I've shot it on the red at 25 frames a second, 1/50 shutter, and as you can see, it's incredibly noisy. Because of those settings in this low light environment, I have had to push my ISO to 6400, which is why it does look so noisy. When I take that into the 25 frames a second Premiere timeline and speed ramp that, it's incredibly jittery, it's really fast, and it doesn't look very clean, it doesn't look very professional. So what I've actually done next is I've shot it on the red again. I've shot it at 1 frame a second at 1/2 shutter. Now your shutter speed should always be double your frame rate to get a nice, clean exposed image and to have the natural motion blur. Now it's 25 frames in a second, so when I shoot this for a length of time, I think I shot it for an hour and it played back 2 minutes 40 roughly time lapse. That's gonna play back at a regular, comfortable rate of 25 frames a second at 50 shutter. That's what it's gonna look like. Although that's not the settings, when that's interpreted, that is how it will look. So as you can see, the image is very clean. It has sort of a natural amount of motion blur and it does look really nice. Because that shutter speed is so low, I don't have to push that ISO, which is why it's so clean. So this is a really great way to get a high quality time lapse, a much more professional time lapse. And that function is in a lot of cinema cameras. You don't find those sorts of functions in like DSLRs and mirrorless cameras too much that go to very low frame rates, which is why we have the Intervalometer. I think the Intervalometer beats these sorts of settings here. While this also has its place, if you're shooting documentaries and stuff like that, you need a quick time lapse. That's a really great way to go. But to really open up your creativity, an Intervalometer is fantastic. If you've ever seen night sky time lapses where the stars are moving overhead or beautiful light streams behind cars, that's all achieved sort of with tools like this. And what that allows you to do is program into the remote, which will talk to the camera via this cable. And what that's going to do is tell the camera that you want to take a photo for this long at this many intervals to spit out a particular length of video. And to achieve those night sky time lapses, you would set your settings on the camera to, let's say, a 30-second exposure. And what that would do is that it opens up the sensor and essentially takes a photo for an entire 30 seconds. So it's drawing in that much information, that much light to expose the image. And if it's completely pitch black in the night sky, you're gonna get those beautiful stars from a setting like that. Now that's just one photo. If you want that to be a video, you would get this little tool right here, you would plug that in and you would program and say, can you take those settings every 20 seconds for the next 3 hours? And the camera will go, yeah, sure thing. Press the button and away it's gonna go. It's gonna remotely do that for you. There is a little bit of math involved in this. You kind of have to know how long you want the time lapse to be at the end of it so that you know how many photos you're trying to hit. You know, if you've programmed it to take one photo every minute, it's going to take you 25 minutes to get 1 second. So you got to think about that when you're doing these things. But to show you a little example, I shot a documentary in Central Australia in the desert, and I used this tool. And I basically set, I think, a 30-second exposure to take a photo every 20 seconds over like 3 hours or something. It was 1 a.m. in the morning. It almost looks like the sun is setting and the stars are coming out behind it, but that's actually the moon. So that's a really cool time lapse you can achieve with something like this. If you've ever seen any time lapses that actually move, that's because they are on a system that is talking with the camera. So let's say a remote dolly or a remote track, like once the photo's been taken, it's moving and then the camera's firing. That way, when it's stitched together, it's incredibly smooth. If you want to achieve that yourself, there's something called a Hyperlapse, which is kind of like a stop motion time lapse where you physically move the camera. Now you don't need this, you don't need the red, you don't need, well, you need a tripod, but you don't need anything but a tripod and your camera. And what you do is you take a photo, move your tripod, take a photo, move your tripod. What that's doing is basically manually doing that track yourself. So it kind of has this sort of stop motion time-lapse effect to it, and there's been some beautiful work that people have done, especially traveling or architecture hyperlapses. They're really quite nice. So that's something that you can start doing right now, even without this or without those other settings. So that's a really cool trick that you should try. If you really want to push your creativity, using something like this, or having the knowledge of taking down to those lower shutters, those lower frame rates, are going to yield a really, really great time lapse. So I think what you guys can take away from this is that don't be set on just setting up, hitting record and speeding it in post. That's not going to give you the best looking time lapse. Plan out your shoots and plan out the length of time you want this time lapse to go for, and you're going to get a much greater result. So I'm probably going to be doing a tutorial Tuesday on this little guy and showing you how to use that. So when we come back to JMC, you guys can jump on that and do some really cool stuff with it. But that's everything from me today. So hope you guys stay safe, stay creative, and we'll see you next week.